Now, this morning, I want us to continue our look at James, looking at divine wisdom, wisdom that is from above, wisdom that indeed comes from God. And in particular, what I want us to notice this morning is what James has to say, which is, I think, incredibly important about faith, about our faith in God. So I'm going to be reading from James chapter 2, verses 14 through 26, and you can follow along in the screens or in your Bibles if you would like to. What good is it, my brothers, if someone says he has faith but does not have works? Can that faith save him? If a brother or sister is poorly clothed and lacking in daily food, and one of you says to them, "Go in peace, be warmed and filled," without giving them the things needed for the body, what good is that? So also faith by itself, if it does not have works, is dead. But someone will say, "Oh, you have faith and I have works. Show me your faith apart from your works, and I'll show you my faith by my works. You believe that God is one. You do well. Even the demons believe and shudder. Do you want to be shown, you foolish person, that faith apart from works is useless? Was not Abraham our father justified by works when he offered up Isaac his son on the altar? Was not Abraham, you see that faith was active along with his works, and faith was completed by his works. And the scripture was fulfilled that says, Abraham believed God and it was counted to him as righteousness, and he was called a friend of God. You see that a person is justified by works and not by faith alone. And in the same way, was not also Rahab the prostitute justified by works when she received the messengers and sent them out by another way? For as the body apart from the spirit is dead, so also faith apart from works is dead. I want us to begin our discussion of what James is sharing with us here by making three observations that I think are very important in understanding the very important point that James is making about faith. First of all, I want you to keep in mind, because this is important, and it's not an unimportant differentiation, that James' discussion here is about faith, okay? It is not about religion. Now, as we talked about previously, chapter 1, remember, James talked about what pure religion is. And the fact that pure religion is not just what we do outwardly. It's not just the actions that we perform. And technically, that's kind of the meaning that the word carries with it. It refers to going through certain ritual actions, looking correct, and so on. And James' point in talking about religion is that religion is something that ultimately is reflected in your care for others and you're seeking purity to please God. Now, the word religion, as I pointed out to you in that study, is only used 4 times in the whole New Testament. 4 times. As much as people talk about religion, God doesn't spend a whole lot of time talking about religion. But he spends a whole lot of time talking about faith. Because faith isn't that outward show, okay? Faith is inside us. And it is faith that James is going to argue here is transformative. And so the discussion of religion is going to be very brief. The discussion of faith is going to be one of the longest sections here in the book of James. And of course, the subject of faith and the discussion of faith is going to occupy multiple chapters in the New Testament because it is so central to who we are. Now, there are different gradations, degrees of faith. And that, I think, exists for a couple of reasons, and it's very, very real. I mean, if you take a person who's a brand new Christian who's just been converted, is their faith probably going to be as deep and strong as someone who's been a Christian for years and years and years? Probably not. But over time, can that faith grow and can that faith develop? Well, it absolutely can. And it should. Now, a part of that is going to be tied to how much you care about your faith, to the interest you show in your faith. If a person isn't particularly interested in knowing God, interested in knowing His will, then chances are their faith isn't going to grow like someone's who is. But all of us in our walk with God right now, every single solitary one of you, are at a certain point in your walk of faith. And you're probably at a different point than I am, and of everybody around you, again, because faith is such an incredibly individual matter. It's interesting as you read through Scripture, let me just point out something to you. As you look at the words of Jesus, He's going to talk about those who have what He calls little faith. Passages like Matthew chapter 8, verse 26. He's going to bemoan, "O ye of little faith." And in fact, several times in the Gospels, Jesus is going to bemoan people's, He'll call it little faith. By the way, let me just mention something else real quickly too. The word faith in the New Testament is used in a couple of different ways. One is going to be used of the faith, of the body of belief that we hold to. That's what Rob was basically making reference to when he was up here talking about our eating of the Lord's Supper. It is the knowledge of what Jesus shared with us about who He is and why He came and why He died and all that. That is the faith that we hold, okay? That body of knowledge that is ours. But there's also another tremendously important aspect of faith, and that's the one really that James is talking about here, and that is the simple concept, but very important concept, of trust. Faith isn't just a body of knowledge. We're going to spend more time talking about this. Faith is trusting God. And so when Jesus here laments, "O ye of little faith," I don't think He's necessarily lamenting just a lack of knowledge. I think very much He's lamenting a lack of trust in Him. In another place, Jesus will talk about a mustard seed faith in Matthew chapter 17 and verse 20. Now, that appears to be in the context of the faith that will grow and spread throughout the world, okay? The faith that will be shared by the apostles with so many people, by others. And He speaks of it as a mustard seed, and it's a beautiful picture. You know, mustard seed, it's a little tiny thing, if you've seen a mustard seed, it grows into a pretty good sized bush. And so Jesus says there's a very real possibility that something can start out very small and turn into something great. In the book of Mark, chapter 9, verse 24, there's an incident that occurs that I think this statement is probably more reflective of where most of us are than anything else. Jesus has come down off the Mount of Transfiguration. He's come to a little village on the north side of the Sea of Galilee. His apostles are there. There's a boy in the village who's just being tortured by a demon, throwing himself into fire, throwing himself into water. This poor child is just in a state. And his daddy is in a worse state, because imagine that's your child, and your child is going through that ongoing kind of torture. And the apostles haven't been able to do anything with this demon. They haven't been able to cast it out. Jesus comes into the village. He sees what's going on. This daddy is going to come to him, and he's basically going to say, "If you can, would you do something about this?" And Jesus' response is going to be, "If you can." Basically, he's going to challenge his belief. And the man's response is, "Lord, I believe. Help my unbelief. And isn't that where most of us are? Lord, it's not like I don't believe, but do I believe as deeply sometimes as I should? Do I believe as completely as I should? Do I always trust you like I should? Are there times when I start looking way too much at me and not enough at you? When I start looking at the winds and the waves figuratively, instead of at your presence in the boat, are there those times? Yeah. I mean, I hate to admit it, but yeah, there are. And so for a lot of us, I think, we're at that point of, Lord, yeah, I believe. But please help me when I don't believe as much or as deeply or in the way that I should. And then a couple of times Jesus will talk about great faith. When this Canaanite woman comes to him and she begs him to cast the demon out of her daughter, Jesus is going to say, there's great faith. I believe in Acts chapter 7, when Stephen walks into the middle of what he knows is going to be a suicide mission. He knows if he stands up and preaches to the audience that he's about to preach to, what he's going to preach, they're probably going to kill him. And that's exactly what they do. Brothers and sisters, there's only one way Stephen is going to walk into that mess and do what Stephen does. That is because he has a great faith. When they stone Paul and leave him for dead, and he picks himself up on that first missionary journey and walks right back into the city, among the people that just tried to kill him, probably did kill him. I don't know about what God didn't raise him from the dead there. You talk about great faith. You talk about great trust. There it is. You see, it's very important to understand that faith is a life-changing conviction. It is not mere mental assent. And way too often, I think, in our country today, do you believe in God? Oh, I believe in God. Yeah. Okay. But mental assent, acceptance of faith, yeah, I think there's some kind of being out there. There's some kind of deity. That's a long ways from the kind of faith James is talking about here. In 2:19, remember what he said? Even the demons believe and shudder. Hooray! Okay, you say you believe in God. Demons do and tremble, okay? But they don't change how they live. They still stand in opposition to God. Back to 2:16, where he talks about seeing these people who are hungry and in need, and the response is, well, be warmed and filled. Listen to him. What good's that? Brethren, that's an incredibly important question. We're going to hear in a little while about a real need down in Honduras. And I do believe it's fine that we pray and that we ask God to help those brethren. I think also it's important that we dig into our pockets and we help those people, because they're starving to death and they desperately need help. I wrote an extra check this morning and put it back there, notated for this work. I hope you'll do the same. Because it's one thing to talk about helping out other people. It's one thing to talk about them being in need. It's another thing to actually make a difference. That's when your faith shows. Not just talking about doing something, but actually doing it. As James will say, faith without works is what? It's dead. Dead horse can't work cattle, can it? Dead dog can't point birds. And a dead faith isn't going to change anything. It is without life. Okay? James says faith without works is dead. Our faith is going to manifest itself in what we do. Now, he cites two examples from the Old Testament. And these fascinate me. And so I want us to focus our thoughts for the next couple of minutes on these, because he's making some incredibly important points by citing the example of these two folks. First of all, he talks about Abraham offering up Isaac. And notice, if you just read this and you didn't know the story, doesn't he say Abraham offered Isaac? He doesn't talk about God delivering Isaac. He doesn't talk about the ram caught up in the brush. He doesn't talk about God staying Abraham's head, because I believe that what he's saying is, in Abraham's mind, his son had his throat cut. In Abraham's mind, he had taken the life of his son. That's the only way he could do it, was if he had already done it in his head. And so he talks about how God comes to Abraham. Genesis 22. Abraham, I want you to take your son, your only son, Isaac. I want you to take him to Moriah, and I want you to sacrifice him as a burnt offering to me. Man. Can't even imagine what must have gone through his mind. Can't even imagine what he must have struggled with, but he does it. And so when you look at the example of Abraham, to me, it's one of the greatest examples in all the Bible of faith. It's one of the first examples I would think of to cite as you talk about a faith which changes your life, because, wow, look at what Abraham does. But the second story is the one that just rocked my boat. I mean, how many of you, when asked for examples of faith to cite in the Bible, would go, oh, Rahab, yeah, she's one I'd pick. See, I don't think so. And yet James, and it's not accidental, chooses Rahab. Now, if you're not familiar with that story, Rahab is a prostitute who lives in Jericho. And Israelite spies have been sent in to spy the land. They're camped on the other side of the Jordan. They're fixing to invade. They send spies in to check out the city of Jericho. These spies come into the city, and they come in and stay in the house of this prostitute. Now, the people of the town obviously know these guys are strangers. They're suspicious. Word gets around. They come looking for them, and Rahab hides them, provides with a way of escape, and misleads their pursuers about where they've gone. And she does so, the text says, back in chapter 2 of Joshua, because she has heard about Yahweh and has come to believe in him. Now, I want you to think about this for a minute, because I believe what James has done is pick two extremes. And he wants to present to you how two extremes can both show the same response of faith to God. Consider Abraham and Rahab have totally different life experiences. How many times, I don't think there's probably been very, very few individuals in all of human history who have had more direct interaction with God than Abraham. From the time that he's told to leave his home, through his experience, what we'll know as the promised land, how many times does God speak? How many times does he hear God's voice? How many people have an opportunity to sit down and bargain with God like he does over Sodom and Gomorrah? How many people have had God say to them, I am going to give you a son of promise. And through your seed, all the nations of the earth are going to be blessed. And he, when he is too old to have a baby, has a baby along with Sarah. That baby's Isaac. I mean, Abraham, if anybody has had this deep, abiding, ongoing relationship with God, if anybody has been shown again and again, you can trust him. I mean, look how many times God has pulled Abraham's fat out of the fire. Whether it's in Egypt or dealing with those Mesopotamian invaders, on multiple occasions, God's hand's been directly involved in preserving his health, his life. And so here's a man who, when put to the test, his faith shows it, but look at where he's coming from. Now, Rahab. You see, later on with Ruth, now Ruth has rubbed shoulders with Naomi for years. Ruth's known Naomi's husband. Ruth's been married to an Israelite man who had, and she knew his brother. And I think through the years, the holiness and the deep faith that is held by Naomi and her family rubs off on Ruth. And so Ruth's a convert in essence. And so Ruth is going to say to Naomi, oh, I want your God to be my God. I want your people to be my people. You see, I get it with Ruth. But Rahab? I mean, it's not like she's gone to school and learned about Yahweh. It's not like she's had family influence. It's not like she's been taught. She has heard, and she tells the spies, I've heard about what God did getting you out of Egypt, and I've heard about the nations that you've conquered and about the power that God has shown, and I absolutely believe that your God is God. And on that basis, coming from a totally different place than Abraham, coming to faith in completely different ways, they are both willing to trust God with what they value most. And I believe that is the point that James is making. Abraham is going to take the son of promise with him. And he so trusts God that he's going to go through with, if necessary, sacrificing that boy so precious to him because he trusts God that much. And you got to understand what Rahab's putting on the line. If people find out that Rahab is covered up for those spies, she's a dead woman. And her family's dead, and she knows it. But she's in double jeopardy. Because here comes this invading army. And if this invading army doesn't keep their word, because remember, she says, listen, I'll protect you, I'll watch out for you, if you promise me that when you come in, you won't kill my family and myself. And they promise her they won't make arrangements to identify her place so that nobody will kill them. But she has enough faith that she'll put her family on the line and her welfare on the line because she believes that Yahweh is the powerful God. And so here's Abraham here and here's Rahab here, both having their lives transformed by their faith, both willing to go to extremes because of their faith. And so our lifelong challenge is to truly trust God. I mean, really trust Him. As Paul will write in 2 Corinthians 5, verse 7, for we walk by faith, not by sight. And that's true. Ultimately, we do. So in conclusion, 3 thoughts real quickly. Number 1, wisdom, I believe, is reflected in knowing who to trust. Do people put their faith in people that they shouldn't put their faith in? They sure do. And you pay a horrific price when you do, don't you? I mean, I think one of the things that wisdom is about is figuring out who can I trust and who can I not trust, and acting accordingly. Wisdom is reflected in knowing, I can trust God. He is trustworthy. I can trust Him. Secondly, there's a big difference, and I want you to notice this and keep it in mind because it's so important. There's a big difference between believing in God and believing God. There are a lot of people who believe in God, but they don't believe God. Oh, I believe, like I said there, I believe in God. Oh, yeah, I absolutely do. I believe in God. Well, boy, your life sure doesn't show it. Because you're not honoring His word, you're not honoring His will, you're not seeking to serve Him or glorify Him in any way. You say you believe in Him. Well, fine. Listen to James. The demons believe in what? They shudder at least. Okay, at least it bothers them that much. There are a lot of people who say they believe in God and they don't even shudder, do they? They don't have any respect for Him at all. Believing in God is not the same as believing God. Abraham didn't just believe in God, he believed God. Okay? Rahab, bless her heart, I don't know how she got there, but she did. She didn't just believe in God. She believed Him. And that's what we're called to do, to believe Him. Because you see, a faith that doesn't change your life really isn't faith at all. It's not. Faith that changes your life is a live faith. Otherwise, James says it's what? It's dead. It's of no good to anybody. And so what we're called to, as James says, is a faith that makes a difference in our life every day. Like we've talked about, if your faith is really your faith, if you really do believe in God and in His will and you want to honor Him, then you're going to behave yourself on Friday just like you do on Sunday. And you're going to behave yourself in Chicago or San Francisco or New York just like you behave yourself right here in Fort Gibson. Because you see, it's what's inside you. It's your internal conviction that guides your life and directs your life. It's not your circumstance. It's not your situation. It's who you are. Because what James is saying is faith changes who you are. It changes your actions to conform to God's will no matter where you are or who you're with. That's what saving faith is all about. And that is wisdom from above. This morning, if you're willing to give your life to God and let Him change your life, and your faith will change your life, give your life to Him. And allow Him to change your priorities, to change what's important. If you'll confess your belief that Jesus is the Son of God, you'll put Him on in baptism, you'll give your life to Him. He promises to walk with you and to bless you. And as was pointed out again by Rob when he was talking about our eating of the Lord's Supper, we are surrounded by this great cloud of witnesses. People like Abraham, people like Rahab, who can tell you, yeah, it's worth it. It is absolutely worth it. Trust Him. We can help you in any way. Won't you come? While we stand and while we sing.